Hey everybody, Dave Walker here with the B2SMB Institute. This is probably my proudest guest, or the guest I'm most proud of that we've managed to attract to our Leaders Forum. Not that the rest of you aren't fantastic, but I am very pleased to welcome Evan Goldberg, the founder and EVP of Oracle NetSuite. Welcome, Evan.
Well, thank you. I'm sure that's hyperbole, but I appreciate it.
No, it's really, I think that I have such admiration for your story, and how you built it. And I want to hear it. I want to hear, from your lips. Tell us how you built what you built.
Well, I think my story is very similar to the story of many of the entrepreneurs that we serve and that people in the audience serve. Started with just an idea, and it came from some experiences I'd had running my own business, learning what was available for fast growing businesses in terms of the systems they could use to get visibility and control over their fast growing enterprise. And there was nothing really. I mean, you had to cobble stuff together. It ran on people's PCs.
Mm-hmm.
Someone was browsing the web, you couldn't find out how much money you were making. So it was clear to me that there had to be a better way. I kind of imagined that bigger companies had more sophisticated systems, and they do to some degree, though I've learned that there was need there also. But I basically went to Larry Ellison, who had been supporting me in my first venture, but sort of off in the distance, and said, hey, I really want to pivot and get into business software because I see this big demand for small businesses to have better systems. And he said, oh, I was just thinking about this. If I were to start a business right now, it would be accounting for small companies and delivered over the web. And it's really important that it be delivered over the web because these companies don't want to have to manage databases and computers. And I thought that was very self-aware, that he realized that most people in the world don't want to manage databases. And so, it really just started with and I said, well, okay, accounting's great, but I'm really interested in sales. And he said, yeah, we'll definitely need to do the front office stuff. But we got to start with the back office stuff. That's where the core of your business information is. And that it was that really straightforward idea. That's what led to NetSuite. The fact that it was a suite of kind of all the things you needed for your business, to get visibility and control and collaboration and productivity and agility. That's kind of like the things that we think we sort of deliver to small companies, and get it via a suite delivered over the net. That's NetSuite. And so that animating idea, we over the next 23 years or so, we've been working on that same vision.
And growing immensely the whole time, and growing in capabilities, and obviously from the perspective of being a global company that serves small businesses around the world. I can't help but ask you, what's your perspective of this last year, of what's happened in this last year?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people in the audience probably saw the same things that we did. It really differed by segment. Some segments grew, kind of counter-cyclically because of how things changed so fast. And then, a lot of segments and industries really had to hunker down. What we were really impressed by was the resilience of our customers. We had only a modest increase in cancellation rate. So people hunkered down, and a lot of people used the time to rethink, reinvent, and it's they took their passion and applied it to with the confidence that they were growth was going to return, applied it to retooling, and I think those companies are going to come out when the business comes back really strong.
Kudos to you guys, because very early on, and I was kind of in the midst of our large community of businesses, small business brands, was watching what everyone was doing and trying to respond, particularly in those first 90 days, to first of all, the recognition that holy mackerel, this is really going to affect our customer base, but more importantly, what can I do to help?
Yeah.
And you guys kind of very quickly put together a resource center for your customers, really from your customers, to really help each other with the supplies necessary to deal with shutdown, to deal with quarantine, to deal with really kind of new rules and regulations about how we could socially interact with each other.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about kind of the inspiration of that, and then really kind of how you went about really deploying it.
Yeah. Well, there was like, I think it was true in a lot of companies, there was a ton of energy at the beginning on
Hmm.
how can we help and how can our customers help each other. And so there's a couple things that were really exciting. Some of our customers pivoted really quickly to making, um, variety of pandemic associated products.
Hmm.
And so we had, a company that made medical ties that was able to retool to make face shields,
Hmm.
and they were planning to sell them to sort of their same customers, but they got immense demand from their friends and family, and soon enough, like the word spread like wildfire. And we worked together with them for them to stand up a web store so that they could sell these to the public, and they were churning them out. So like they changed their whole business model in the matter of weeks. That's what small companies can do. They can be super agile. So those kinds of things of people working together. There was a lot of excitement in our organization about helping some of the nonprofits. The CDC Foundation happened to be a customer of NetSuite. We have a large segment in not-for-profit,
Hmm.
and they had like explosion of donations, and they needed to figure out where they should go within the CDC and all this kind of stuff. And so we got employees empowered to help them. So I think there was just a lot of collaboration, and it was a time that was obviously really dark in a lot of ways. But in all these times, obviously, there's some great silver linings that come out of it.
So now we're moving into this phase where, and I say this with fingers crossed, that it appears as though the recovery is really taking shape. I don't think anybody's certain of the pace of it, or how uneven or even it's going to be across all sectors. But you guys have lived through many challenges in your history. What, as a leader, what do you recommend? What's the mindset required to really kind of come out of times of tribulation into times of recovery, and
Yeah.
frankly of real opportunity?
Right.
What's
Well,
the
one of the
playbook?
things you have to do is figure out which of those things that you did during that cycle or downturn or what have you that you really should carry forward.
Hmm.
We lived through the .com bubble as a company, and then through the financial crisis. It was during the financial crisis we had, already had several thousand customers, and they were really hit hard. I'd say almost harder than the pandemic. We saw even more impact on a lot of our customers during that time, and we had to retool how we worked with them to make sure that they were still continuing to see value, that we were helping them just make it through. And so we really reorganized and retooled our organization that works with existing customers,
Hmm.
sort of our customer success area. And those were great changes. I think they helped stanch some of the bleeding in our customer base. And we've carried through many of those changes today. On the other hand, there's going to be some changes that you made that are transient. So one of the things is figuring out what you can learn and carry forward, and then the pivot. You pivot back towards growth. Back then we we knew when we saw ourselves coming out of it, we're like, well, okay, now we need to scale our new business again, and what new things are we going to do there? And that maybe here, especially in this situation, it is changing circumstances depending on what industry you're in. There's a lot of change happening that may be permanent, and you have to figure out how that impacts you. I mean, you imagine a fitness company. I mean, there's been so much excitement around at home, remote on-demand fitness.
Hmm.
If you're a gym, how do you tap into that while of course still taking advantage of the fact that you have the benefit of on-premise? So that, to me, this is one of these it's much more of a discontinuity, I think, than sort of these economic or solely economic downturns. So
Hmm.
there's a lot more to think about, especially in a lot of industries that are going to have sort of permanent changes.
And do you guys, when you're sitting around and thinking of the opportunities of this recovery, do you think in terms of sectors? Do you think in terms of those that were successful during the pandemic versus those who were not? Or do
Yeah.
you think in terms of here are the sectors that are going to be most successful coming out of the pandemic? How do you
Well,
break it down?
it's not quite as easy as it might sound, because
Hmm.
companies have done these pivots, and they've, again, that we don't, in many cases you look at a company that on their face you think maybe they weren't going to be there, it's going to be rough for them, but they managed to pivot in such a way. I mean, a simple example is in our town we have a restaurant that opened outdoors, a large section outdoors, which was where they were only serving. um, Now they've gotten the ability to serve back in the, at limited capacity in their kind of indoor, and that's going to, and this is like an amazing opportunity. It turns out that the town loves the outdoor dining, and they may permanently expand to that. So I think,
Hmm.
companies that have been agile, in any industry, may come out of this stronger in some cases. It's kind of, there's definitely been some really interesting cases of that. So we just really try to look at each case individually and see how we can help. I think it is a time that we're going to see an enormous amount of change. And
Hmm.
so, and helping companies manage through change is sort of one of the most important things we do as a sort of software and systems provider. And I know a
Hmm.
lot of the audience has, the types of products and services that are helping companies be more agile, and that's going to be more necessary than ever as everybody sort of does something a little bit different.
Right, right. What are the most, you guys I know have a lot of dialogue with your customers. What are some of the challenges that they are identifying to you
Yeah.
that they're articulating?
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, there were all kinds of weird supply chain
Right.
challenges. And,
Hmm.
that's another one of those things, like I talked about before, where people are making their supply chain more resilient. That's a good thing. You want
Right.
that always. And
Hmm.
so
Right.
I think that what we see as customers sometimes need their systems to become more sophisticated, because their supply chain has become more sophisticated, because their sales channels have become more sophisticated. Like the company I mentioned that had gone, they're going to still make, medical ties, but now they have a whole new market, potentially B2C.
Hmm.
So, I think it's just the time that we're just trying to, in those kind of disruptions that are
Hmm.
maybe sort of permanent, are the kinds of things we're seeing. So new business models, trying to develop supply chain resiliency. Um, I think that uh, some of the cost controls that people have done, where they've, had to look more closely at everything they do, a lot of that they're gonna want to carry that forward. So just a, more scrutiny, and it's like you said, it's going to be bumpy,
Hmm.
probably. I mean, we
Hmm.
don't, no one knows what's going to happen. There's still a lot of uncertainty out there. And so anything that you've done to kind of get better control on things and better visibility into exactly what's happening, I think companies want to maintain that going forward.
Um, does your product change as this recovery happens, or is these new opportunities kind of and challenges present themselves?
Um, I not substantially, because I think we've been really focused. I mean, our vision is about helping businesses achieve their business transformation. And
Hmm.
we market to companies that are going through that sort of fast growth phase, where things get a lot more complex, and yet they still need to be super agile, because things are still changing. So that combination of sort of getting control over the change but maintaining that agility, that's what we've been focused on all along. And this is exactly the kind of time that becomes incredibly important. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen a lot of businesses adopt NetSuite even during this time where, business might be slower, just because they are predicting that change is going to be a constant, and yet they are expecting growth to come back. And so that kind of need for control and need for agility is going to be more than ever.
And and that's a great answer. I'm curious also if not so much that the product changes, but the delivery changes, or the demands around the delivery really
Yeah.
change or become more institutionalized. And
Right.
I'll just
Well,
give
oh, sorry, go
give a
ahead.
quick
Yeah.
example of your friends down the street at ShipStation recognizing that as they were blasting out tons and tons of ShipStation platforms to all these small to mid-sized businesses who suddenly needed that e-commerce back end, recognized they were drawn very quickly into the demand that those small to mid-sized businesses had, not in the training of how to produce a label, but actually how to produce the customer experience associated with shopping online and what
Right.
the expectations were that had been established by Amazon. So in the course of this last year, because I know you were very intensely in conversations with so many customers, does that become kind of more institutionalized within NetSuite that you really realize we have to upskill basically our small to mid-sized business customers?
Yeah, and I think we're always trying to figure out new ways that we can add value for our existing customers and help them achieve more success. I mean, we want to unlock a lot of value that comes from the fact that we provide a sort of more comprehensive
Mm-hmm.
system than maybe they would otherwise be using. And so unlocking that value, a great example is your people. Now, we're coming into a time where I think there is going to be a lot of dislocation. People have been hunkered down for a year, and they've been thinking about, well, when I get out of this, what's next? So I think we're going to see a lot of moving around. Obviously, we're seeing physical moving around, but I think career moving around. And so, I think that puts more pressure on companies to really manage their people
Mm-hmm.
incredibly well. And so the HR capabilities in NetSuite, for example, we call it Suite People, is something that I think companies will probably need to adopt more quickly in their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
As we see a lot of this, again, this change is going to be change for people. And so, yeah, it's our job to help them expand their use of systems that they might have adopted later. They don't necessarily, when they're younger as a company, they don't necessarily have the resources to use some of these more sophisticated tools. And yet, because of this dynamic environment, they may need them. So that's an area where we'll probably have to provide more support to help them unlock all the value. And if I kind of analogize to, I think that's going to be true for a lot of companies that serve small businesses. Their life is going to be more complex with their people, with their markets, with their products, with their business model. And if you're providing tools to companies that are going through that, you may be seeing that kind of change happening earlier in the life cycle, and you're going to have to modify for that. They're not going to have the same resources to adopt and consume, your products or services at that stage of the company.
No, I think you're spot on. So as you cast your eyes forward, what does growth look like now? Is it the same old kind of growth of just it's all about acquisition, it's all about kind of the numbers, or is there something more to it now?
Well, again, in a time of great change, it's hard for anybody to predict
Mm-hmm.
what growth is going to look like. I think, one of the things that we're going to determine is what is the nature of work. And since a lot of us, and people in the audience are providing sort of B2B products and services potentially, what do our customers look like from a work perspective?
Mm-hmm.
Are they working at home more? Are they more geographically diverse? Are they hiring, have they changed their hiring patterns?
Mm-hmm.
So there's much more need for work at home type services, or, we don't know what do the offices look like. If you're a provider of office supplies and things for, sort of office premises, it's unclear. Or is there a lot more hoteling? Probably. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you provide something that makes it easier for people to share resources when they come in, great.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you're not one of those, think about being one of those,
Mm-hmm.
because it's clear to me that people are going to be using their space, attempting to using their space much more efficiently. I mean, it's going to be necessary. If you're not, if you're not doing that, first of all, I think that's going to be the expected employee experience at some point in the future, where I can just show up and I have what I need there. I just walk in and I have what I need wherever, but wherever in the, whatever floor I'm on or whatever. So, the nature of work and is, no one knows exactly what's going to be. It's definitely going to be significantly different. I mean, people have learned a lot about what they can do over Zoom that they probably didn't know they could do before.
Just riffing off of that, what, as you guys, like many companies were, I'm sure, suddenly working virtually 100% and remote, what were some of the discoveries that for your organization kind of became clear?
Well, everybody, I'm sure, has experienced a lot of the same things. Zoom fatigue. You miss those, the water cooler conversations that can lead to great ideas. The lunches that help you get to know your coworkers. At the beginning, it's fine, everybody, but we were hiring and a lot of people were hiring and people are starting to hire again. And all of a sudden you got all these new people. How do you make that connection, which really helps people be as engaged as possible? So I think, again, we're going to go back to doing a lot of that stuff. It's human nature and it's necessary. But we're also going to find new ways to get some of that, even for people working remotely. I mean, there are going to be employees that work 100% remote. How do you get them fully engaged? Well, I think obviously the new tools, the fact that everybody pretty much goes on video on Zoom, unless they're, eating, that's great for remote employees. But what are some other ways that we can increase engagement when people aren't in person? I think organizations are increasingly global. That trend is not going to change. Obviously, there's been a disruption, but I think that trend it's kind of a long-term secular trend. And how do you get remote teams that have people all over the world in different time zones? How can you increase that engagement? And I think the technology will be part of the solution. Best practices will be part of the solution. Travel, when appropriate, will be part of the solution. I mean, but when is it, appropriate? So I think a lot of that is yet to be figured out. And again, I think there's a lot of opportunity for, providers to small business and medium-sized businesses that are growing, and they're growing internationally. They're growing to new offices. They're growing with people that are completely remote. I mean, so many of the companies I work with have almost an entirely remote, their early teams are almost entirely remote. They just hire whoever is the best person for the job, living anywhere pretty much.
Right.
And with things like online education, there is so many more people now becoming qualified for all different kinds of jobs than ever before. So I think that's a huge opportunity for people to figure out in these very remote organizations, how can you optimize employee engagement? It's incredibly important.
The guys who run Zenefits, Jay Fulcher, Kevin Marasco, write about, and maybe not surprising, but the number one means by which they've created engagement is through recognition. Is that in a virtual world, it's so much even more important to really create and almost institutionalize, systematize the calling out of individuals for doing a great job.
Absolutely. We have a Slack channel called Yay Worthy. That's exactly what it does. And so, I totally agree. You're not getting those daily kudos / pats on the back that you might expect when you're working in the office. And it's a great practice. It's a great practice anyway. I mean, recognition is such an important part of, retaining your employees. I mean,
I'll wrap up by just giving kind of the origin story, of why I reached out to you, because you wrote in a year in which racial justice became such an incredibly important topic amongst us personally, professionally, in virtually every circle that I traveled in. It was a very powerful topic of conversation. And you wrote about it from your perspective back, I think it was in Forbes, and I think it was back in the fall. Can you kind of
might have been in Fast Company.
Fast Company. I'm sorry. Can you kind of talk about what you talked about in that?
Yeah, well, when it all went down last summer, it was a shock to the system, but I knew that it was impacting people in my organization, much more dramatically than me, that they had had life experiences that, this just was a significantly more traumatic event, as traumatic as it was for everybody to see that kind of thing. And so it really was it really falls under the category of empathy and trying to the best of your ability, understand things from other people's eyes and in other people's shoes. And it was the same thing for the pandemic. I mean, people had so many different experiences, and I'm fortunate, that we were able to bring our family together in our home, which is relatively spacious, and a lot of people didn't, and my kids were older. A lot of people and families had a very different experience. I don't have a dog, so that there wasn't a dog jumping over me during meetings. I do have a cat. No, but seriously, in all seriousness, people were having really, really different experiences. So it was the same thing for this racial justice. I mean, people had very, very different experiences. And so then it's about listening, the most important thing, and I did listening sessions, and I learned a ton that I had no idea was going on in my organization, good and bad. And so, to me, empathy is the number one most important word in business, because you have stakeholders that are very different from you. And that's your customers, and that's your employees, and that's your investors. And in every single case, you're going to be way more successful if you can see things from their perspective. And so that's really what I tried to do, a lot of listening, and then communicating that we see this as a very important issue, and that this is not we're going to put it together, a program that's not going to be a week or a month or even a year, but we're going to build it in to what we do day-to-day basis, that diversity and equity and inclusion. And I mean, I know, everyone in the audience is trying to do the same thing, and it's hard, and it takes a lot of commitment. And we're trying to do it in unique ways. One of the things I'm most proud of at NetSuite is what we call Oracle NetSuite Social Impact, which is where we give back to organizations by helping them implement NetSuite so that they can sort of do good better and get great visibility and control and agility. And then we actually have employees, knowledgeable, obviously, in NetSuite, that go into those organizations, their favorite organization. They can pick and choose, or we'll find one for them and help them get the most out of NetSuite. One of these organizations is called Impact Justice, and they're organization that's committed to reducing, how many people get kind of locked into the criminal justice system. So that's a way where we could both demonstrate our commitment to change and also just get employees involved in an organization where they may see a very, very different perspective than they're used to. So, just an example of it. It's a long road. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, but you got to keep doing all the other steps too.
Well, listen, my kudos to you for stepping out as a tech leader, as a white man, as an entrepreneur representing such entrepreneurial success, to step out and wrote what you wrote, because I think it lent courage to virtue for many people that, wait a minute, I really do need to step back and start perhaps thinking about things in the way that you challenge all of us to think about it. This has been terrific. I knew it would be. I appreciate your time and joining our audience of your peers, a lot of folks who are in those founder, CEO, executive positions, leadership positions that really are enormously challenged by the times that we are in, and props for facing it bravely and giving us a lot of good lessons here today. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot.